We are back in the kitchen and we're focusing on another very important component of a Sunday roast, which is the gravy. So we started with roast potatoes, which are my favourite element, then the gravy. You cannot have a Sunday roast without gravy. So today what I thought we would do is I'd do a basic gravy without any meat that really would work with pretty much any cut of meat. When it comes to Christmas gravy, I like to make the gravy a couple of days before. What I would normally do is use these ingredients here, which I'll explain, and then I'd also use some chicken wings, which are quite cheap and easy to use to add some meaty flavour to the gravy. Then I would obviously keep the gravy in the fridge for a couple of days, and then I would add the juices from the turkey or the goose or whatever bird we're cooking on Christmas Day to the gravy on the day. But today I thought we would just go for a standard gravy that I make most Sundays, which is a mixture of vegetables, and we're going to use a nice chicken stock. And to be honest, this gravy would work with roast lamb, roast pork, roast beef. When it comes to roast beef, I like to often do a red wine jus, which is totally different. But ultimately, gravy is dead easy to make, and I think a lot of people overthink it, much like with the roast potatoes we were saying in my last video. And I think recently there's been a lot more awareness driven around brands like 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅, which are a quick and easy gravy, which I probably grew up having, and our parents' generation were a result of sort of very clever marketing. But the additives, the chemicals, the ingredients in brands like that are pretty terrifying. And there's no goodness in it. If anything, it's probably going to do you more damage. So why not make the gravy from scratch? And it really is pretty quick and easy. So when it comes to making gravy, it's ultimately very important to consider what you're going to put in there. You need some really strong flavours and a nice base to give the gravy a really strong flavour. And onions and garlic are pretty much a given. But outside of that, you can mix it up depending on what you can get hold of, depending on what you've got in the fridge, and depending on what's in season. For a standard gravy, I always like to use a mixture of red and white onion for a different combination of flavour. We've got a whole bulb of garlic here and some celery, and then we've got some carrots that I'll chop, roughly chop. Leeks also add a really nice, obviously oniony flavour to the gravy as well. And then what we've got here is we've got an organic chicken bone broth. Any chicken stock is pretty good that comes in a liquid form, or you can get a nice River Cottage paste, which turns into a chicken stock. I would try and avoid any of the cubes or stock pots because they often tend to have additives and nasties in them as well. But always read the back of the packet. This chicken stock will work nicely. And the final addition you're going to want to consider is some nice fresh herbs. But we're going to go out to the garden. It's a lovely day today, so we're going to go out to the herb garden and we're going to cut those and see what we have available to add to the stock as it cooks. So let's get started. When it comes to the prepping of the veg, to be honest, don't overthink it. You just want to roughly chop everything, get it in the pan with some olive oil and some sea salt, and then that will get it in the oven. So I wouldn't overthink it. I just like to create lots of angles, lots of nice shapes. Normally I tend to start with the onions. You can use as much of the onion as you can. To be honest, I tend to take the skin off because I just don't love how it looks. But if you want to leave the skin on, it's not going to do you any harm. I'm just going to stick them in the pan. We're going to be making quite a lot of gravy today. This will be enough for 10 to 12 people, which I'm going to save for the weekend because unlike other cooking YouTubes, we are actually making something that's going to be eaten and enjoyed. So yeah, just stick them in. I would say one key thing to consider when you're chopping this veg is not to make it too small. I think it just roasts better when it's a bigger size. I mean, as I say, you're not going to find any scientific Heston Blumenthal style tips on this channel. It's all just tried and tested. I've kind of learnt as I've gone along. Please don't judge my chopping skills because they're probably not the best. When it comes to the carrots, you don't need to peel them. Maybe just give them a quick rinse and then just cut them into nice chunky angles like this. And of course, another way of avoiding wasting anything, if you follow Josie's YouTube channel, which you probably do, you will know that she loves making bone broth and broth in general. When we drain this gravy towards the end of the process, you could reuse this veg in more of a broth. When it comes to celery, you will want to give it a good rinse because, as you know, mud seems to get everywhere, particularly when you're buying ingredients from a farm shop. And we talked about it on the last video, but in terms of provenance of food and where your food comes from, we certainly like to really make sure we do our research. This is all from a local farm shop. Most of it's organic. Some of it is grown locally where it's grown organically, but the soil hasn't been left for 7 years, so it's not certified organic. But my advice, even when it comes to the gravy, is really do give some thought to the provenance of your food, because it makes a difference and it's better for your health ultimately. So with the celery, lots of different angles. Celery, don't ask me why, but celery just is an absolute necessity for any gravy. I would say the 3 non-negotiables are onions, garlic and celery. Next up for the leeks, it's another veg that you definitely need to give a really good rinse. Now you can use these stalks as well, because they've obviously got lots of flavour in there, but just make sure there's no mud in the gaps, particularly when you do buy things from a farm shop and not a supermarket. Things won't always have been washed quite as thoroughly. These are obviously early season leeks, which is why they're so thin, but they are, well, everything in this pan is grown in the UK. And then when it comes to the garlic, you want a nice big bulb, and obviously get the back of your knife on top and just smash it down like that. And I would say always look to use a whole bulb, because garlic we love our garlic in this household and it just adds so much flavour. When it comes to garlic, I tend to leave the skin on because I feel like it protects it for a little bit longer. Once again, I don't know if there's any science in that, but ultimately if you leave the skin on, it roasts up quite nicely. If you take the skin off, I think it can sometimes burn. So you want to get all of these separated. What you can do when it comes to gravy is obviously just get the bulb of garlic and cut it down the middle and stick it either side. That works quite nicely in a red wine jus, but for this I want the garlic to really get everywhere in the gravy. So we're going to separate these all out. It's a bit messy. And we're going to open up some of these cloves just to allow the flavour to really escape, and we're going to leave a few closed. Don't know whether that really helps or not, but these are sort of little things that I've just always been doing, and it always tends to seem to work out pretty well. So next up, the all-important fat. Always need to add a fat to the pan when you're roasting anything. With the roast potatoes, we used an animal fat. When it comes to gravy, I like to just use olive oil. We've got an extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed. Always look for a cold pressed olive oil, ideally in a dark bottle, and keep it at room temperature. Don't let it get too warm because that kills some of the goodness. So we're going to give a good glug of olive oil in here, and then we're going to add a nice good handful of salt. Always try and look for a nice coarse sea salt. Then we're going to give it a good shake up, make sure everything's fairly well coated. And one thing I would say is, much like when it came to adding the rosemary and garlic to the roast potatoes in last week's video, I like to add the herbs halfway through this process, just because the herbs can burn, particularly things like rosemary and thyme that we're going to be adding in here. So if we add them in halfway through, this is always already nicely roasted and things are starting to get quite jammy. Then you add in the herbs, they add the flavour, and then we'll obviously add the stock, and we'll take it to the next level. But the important thing here is you can't really over roast this as long as you're not putting it at too high a temperature. Obviously with an oven, I'd probably put it on around 200, 220. The Ardga, it varies in temperature. It's going to be around 220 in this top oven right now. So we're going to stick this in there for roughly about half an hour. Keep an eye on it. Obviously, if you are doing a full Sunday roast, this is a great thing that you can do early on in the day, and get this really ahead of time. And then obviously you can add your meat later on, and that will add to the juices. Equally, if you're doing this for Christmas lunch, my advice would be to do this 2 or 3 days even before. As I say, use chicken wings if you want to add that nice chicken flavour into here. And then when it comes to actually preparing your chicken or the bird on the day, the turkey, you can then obviously add the juices. I would do a smaller trivet, and you can add the juices from that into the gravy when you're heating it up. So really save yourself time on what is a very, very busy day already. So we're going to get this into the Ardga and keep an eye on it while we crack on with herb hunting. So we've got our herbs here. I've got just a mixture of rosemary. We grow a number of different rosemaries, but we have, I think this is called Jessop's Upright. and this one is just called rosemary common, so that will add nice flavour to the gravy. We've also got thyme, which is, yeah, I think my favourite herb. It just smells amazing, and there's something very festive about thyme. And then we've got sage. We've got purple sage and we've got regular sage. The thing with sage is you don't want to add too much because it is quite a dominant flavour, but when it comes to gravy and you're making it in this quantity, I'm going to add about 4 or 5 leaves of sage. So we're going to add that to the gravy. The gravy's been in for about 25 minutes to half an hour now, so it's getting really nicely roasted. Then we're going to add the herbs in. We'll give it another sort of 20 minutes, and then we'll get to the next step, which is where the gravy really starts to take shape. Beautiful. Give a tiny bit more glug of oil, olive oil on here. A little drizzle. And we're going to put that back in the Aga or oven for about another 20 minutes. The kitchen is going to start to smell rather amazing and quite Christmassy with that time. Let's see how we're doing. There we go. That's what you want. You know, a nice bit of colour on the veg. Almost let the smell do the talking, and it's pretty clear to me that this is ready. What we're going to do now is we're going to get that on the hob of the Aga in this case. We're going to add some flour. We're going to add some stock. And yeah, we're going to, good things take time, and we're going to simmer this on the Aga for about 20 minutes to really infuse the stock. And then we're going to drain it, and then we're nearly there. So we have 2 important ingredients here. We've got corn flour, and we also have some blackcurrant jam. Now, when it comes to the flavour of your gravy, 100% do it to taste and to flavour. Taste it as you go from this point onwards. I always like to use something sweet to add a little bit of sweetness to the flavour of the gravy and a bit of richness. So I'm going to use some blackcurrant jam. You could use cranberry jelly, you could use red currant jelly, you could use strawberry jam, but blackcurrant jam is not too sweet, so it's nice to add that in. I'm going to add that in after, once we've got the corn flour in. Now, there's no ideal quantity when it comes to this. I think you have to just back yourself and do it to feel. For this quantity of gravy, don't be afraid. I'm going to get some corn flour in there, and then we're going to mix it in. Now, it's going to look quite messy for a second, but do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to add quite a bit, because this is going to really help thicken your gravy. You're going to mix this in, and it is going to look quite messy, but the magic is going to happen within a couple of minutes when you add your stock. As I said earlier, we have this nice bone broth here. I believe we actually got this from Piper's Farm, but it's a brand called 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅. So when you get to this point, you're just going to keep stirring in the corn flour and the stock. When you can't see any more corn flour, it's time to turn the temperature up. So I'm going to move it over to, in this instance, this is the hotter hob of the Aga. If you're on a normal hob, just turn the hob up slightly. And we're going to get this simmering away, and that's when it's going to start to really thicken. And that's when the flavours from the chicken stock and the flavours from the roasted vegetables are really going to start combining. It's also a good opportunity to add whatever sort of sweetener you're going to add in. As I say, this is an organic blackberry jam from 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅, our favourites at 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅. It's the last dregs of the jar, so it's a good way of using up the last bit. And it's just going to add a little bit of sweetness to the overall flavour profile of this gravy. So as you can see, that's now really thickened up. And you literally just use your own feel when it comes to making gravy, and you'll get a sense that it's thickened up to the point that now we can drain it. We're going to sieve it into a pan, then we're going to put it back on the hob. We're going to add a little bit of butter, and we're then going to just let it thicken for the final little bit before we enjoy. So yeah, at this point it's very satisfying. It's a little bit messy. What I would say is, when it comes to the right tools for making gravy, it's always good to have a roasting pan that has quite a high side. This is obviously a big roasting pan, which, you know, we tend to have Sunday roast for 6 or 8 people when we do Sunday roasts. And at Christmas, we tend to have around 12 to 14 people, so we've got quite a big family. So it's a good sized pan for that. But if you can find a smaller pan, if there's a smaller number of you, but I don't think you can ever have too much gravy anyway. But the high side will keep it a lot more tidy when it's on the hob, and it will stop things getting messy over the sides. Similarly, this is a straining sieve. Now you don't have to get one of these, a normal sieve will work, but this just tends to work a lot better when it comes to gravy as opposed to what you'd normally use a sieve for. And then we've got quite a big pan here as well. So we're gonna drain this into the pan, as I say. I'm gonna do it over the sink to try and minimize the mess, and then we're gonna get it back on the Aga for its final little stint. So you can see all the lovely juices are coming out. Now the key when it comes to gravy is you don't want to waste any of it, because all that love and energy has gone into A, growing these beautiful vegetables, B, and your money, your hard-earned money buying these vegetables, and then obviously all the effort into cooking it. So you want to get every last drop into this pan. I'm gonna get this over onto the Aga now for the last little bit. So we're in the home stretch now, and we're gonna add a little bit of butter, which just adds some real richness and some fat to the gravy. To taste, don't go crazy. This is a nice organic butter. So we're just gonna stick that in the middle here, and then we're gonna stir and let it finally thicken for that last little stint. And the beauty of gravy, of course, is if you're doing this on the day, you can obviously then just keep it warm on the side of your hob. If you're doing it the night before or the day before, you can obviously let it cool, and then we can store it. And if you're doing it a week before, you could even freeze it. So you can really make the gravy whenever you want in the run up to the big day. And yeah, if we're hosting even a normal Sunday roast, I like to make the gravy the day before, just because it removes one of the big chores of the day. And then you're not rushing. So here we go. So as with anything in the kitchen, it is important to obviously taste it as you go. So at this point, I always like to give it a good taste to see if we obviously need to add any more salt or any more sweetness into it. That's pretty perfect. I'm liking that. Don't need any more salt. So we're just gonna give it a little bit longer to thicken. But we're very, very much getting there. And there you have it, my go-to gravy recipe to help you guys get ahead this Christmas or for any Sunday roast. I will be back soon with a few of my other favorite dishes. Make sure you hit subscribe and let me know how you get on with your gravy.